Welcome guys. This is going to be a summary video for Area Study 3, Unit 1, Sanctions. So in this video here, we are going to be looking at the first three key knowledge areas. Just a reminder, when you are walking into the SAC for this topic, you've got a checklist of 11 key knowledge areas that you're going to be looking at for this area study. So it's really important that after you've watched all these videos, you can go back and look at these key knowledge areas and make sure you're really confident and know how to answer any potential questions that you might face on a SAC. So getting stuck right in, we're going to talk about the principles of justice first. So what I want to start off by saying is that with the principles of justice, generally speaking, you won't be asked for a definition for the principles of justice. Instead, generally, you're going to be asked how one of the principles of justice can be shown in a case study, for example. So it's really important that when you're doing your revision, you have a really clear definition of the principles of justice and start to think about examples in the courtroom or out of the courtroom where justice can be seen or justice can be improved. So first of all, our first principle of justice is what's known as fairness. And that's all about every single party in our cases, like our judge and jury, being impartial and treating cases with an objective manner. So what that means is we want to have really fair legal processes. So if you're getting charged with a crime, you have a fair opportunity to present your side of the case, just like the other party will be able to do. And as part of our judge and jury remaining impartial, we don't want them to have any fear or favor. We don't want to, without being any fear or favor on one side, meaning every single party gets treated the same. So some examples of how that's seen in case studies is with our jury, for example, the jury is randomly selected. And that's what helps to ensure that our members are bias-free and keeping them impartial. Our second principle of justice is what's known as equality. So the really key thing is everyone should be treated equally before the law. So whatever your circumstances, whatever background you come from, whether you're from a low SES background, you speak English as a second language, you should always have the same opportunity. So an example of that is if you couldn't speak English as a first language, for example, you might be offered an interpreter in a courtroom. So when we think about equality, we want to make sure that we don't have any bias in the courtroom and any prejudice is removed. So an example of that with the jury, once again, is if you know any members that are about to be on trial, you can ask to have them removed, or you can be removed yourself as a jury member, because we don't want to have any bias. Lastly, and a really important principle of justice, is the one about access. So it's basically, what do we have in place to ensure people understand their legal rights, such as the right to silence? And if they do find themselves in some legal trouble or facing legal issues, where can they go to pursue their case, maybe apart from court? Or where can they go to get some advice? So some things we have in Victoria to help support people is we have things like Victorian legal aid. So if you can't afford a lawyer, or you just need some legal advice, you can go there to get access to that sort of information to help improve your justice. Moving on, we're going to look at the role of Victoria Police. So for this particular KK here, I'm not going to go through all of these roles, because in a SAC, you'd never be expected generally to talk about 2 or 3 roles total. So I'm going to show you the roles which I think are the easiest to talk about and the easiest to explain. So before I start talking about these roles here in a bit more detail, a common SAC question you can kind of get when you're looking at Victoria Police, for example, is you might be presented with some kind of case study, and the question might be something along the lines of, with reference to the case study, so whatever stimulus material provided, describe the role of the police. And it might be worth 4 marks, for example. So one very important role you can talk about is that Victoria Police are there to preserve the peace. They are generally going to be at protests, sporting events, any events where there's going to be lots of people. And generally speaking, they're there so people can undertake their lives normally. And you might remember from the first topic we looked at, we talked about social cohesion. They're there to make sure we live in a socially cohesive society and we can uphold the law accordingly. So we basically all live in a safe environment and safe community. The next role we have is that they prevent the commission of offences. So what I want you to think about when you think about this particular role is if you've ever been to a train station or a bus stop, generally you'll see these people here known as the PSOs. Or if you've ever been to some busy sporting events, you'll generally see police there. And what we mean by this is we want to prevent crimes before they happen generally. And what we can generally do that through is by visible presence. So if we can see police officers, if we can see PSOs, there's much less likely going to be an opportunity that people do not commit crime. And we also do this by deterring people from committing crimes. So obviously when someone's handed down quite a lengthy sentence, it's all over the news, it's all over TikTok, we can kind of see that if you do get charged with a crime, you're going to be facing some consequences as a result. So that generally deters people from committing crimes. And lastly, we educate people. So we have things like police officers coming out to schools, we have neighborhood watch groups to ensure people feel that community sense and don't fear people breaking the laws. And lastly, if unfortunately we get to the stage where a crime has been committed, obviously Victoria Police needs to step in. They have quite a wide range of resources and they can be used to basically what's known as detect and investigate crime. So if a crime scene happens to occur, they'll be on site. They're going to start to interview people to ask what they saw, what events took place. They might start searching the scene. And then as they get into sort of your more serious crimes, they might be testing for blood, urine, saliva samples on the scene of the crime to help paint a picture about what has happened. So they'll take a very active role. But generally, in terms of apprehending offenders or putting away offenders, when you're getting charged with a minor crime, sometimes you can just be receiving the fine on the spot and you're free to go and you'll pay that at a later date. But obviously, if you've committed a serious assault, for example, or an armed robbery, you're going to get what's known as a court summons. So you'll need to appear in court at a later date to sort of fight your case in a courtroom. So the next institution we're going to kind of look at, or the next group of people, is what's known as a delegated body. So a delegated body is basically a body that is there to make laws in a specific area. So why do we have these people? It's because our parliament only sits for 100 days a year, so they really don't have the time or resources to make laws in every single area. So when we have a delegated body, the most important thing to note is that they are only given laws to make in a specific area. They can't just make laws in any area as they please. And through this, Parliament gives them an enabling act and it allows them to make it in a specific area such as road laws, for example, or such as curriculum. So they're very, very restricted in the laws they can make. But when I want you to think about delegated bodies, I want you to think about it as a way of taking the pressure off Parliament because they're not there for the whole year, for example. So delegated bodies really take the pressure off and give Parliament some breathing room, I guess. And some really, really common examples that you guys would probably be aware of is Vic Roads, for example. So if you're getting your Ls or your Ps, for example, they're there to make everything to do with road laws. The body that underpins your curriculum is the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. So they're there to make laws in relation to curriculum. And then lastly, we've got like the EPA. So any issues to do with pollution, air quality, that sort of thing, the EPA are there to help support legislation in that area. So moving on to, we've looked a little bit about Victoria Police and the delegated bodies that can help make laws. But what I want to focus on now is why it's important to have what's known as a balance between institutional powers and individual rights. So for this context, by institutional powers, I sort of am talking about Victoria Police. So why do we want to have a balance between Victoria Police and your rights, so you as an individual? So what we want to really achieve for Victoria Police is we want the police to be able to prevent and investigate crimes. We need them to be able to do their job. That's what they're paid to do. So they're paid to protect us, they're paid to enforce the law. But at the same time, we don't want to give them too much power because we want to preserve your civil rights. So we want to preserve your rights like the right to silence, the presumption of innocence. So what I'm kind of really getting at this slide here is the police have powers and the individuals have powers. We want to make sure there's a very careful balance between those powers because police need to do their job and you need to be protected in terms of your civil rights and not be facing any sort of police corruption. So why that sort of comes into play is on this slide here, I've got some examples of all the police powers they will generally use. So for example, like I mentioned before, at a crime scene, if we go to a crime scene, we're going to see some things like questioning. They're going to demand your name and address, which you legally have to give. Or if it's quite a violent situation, there's a big fight going on, they can arrest you with or without a warrant. But it's important to know that obviously, as you can see on the right side here, you have all these rights available to you here to ensure that you are protected. So some really, really common ones is that you have the presumption of innocence. You only need to give police your name and your address to confirm your identity, and you don't need to say anything further to prevent incriminating yourself. So that's why you have the right to silence. You also have the right to be cautioned by police. Most importantly, if you find yourself getting charged with an indictable offense, you definitely want to communicate with a lawyer or friend to help give you some advice and that sort of thing. So it's really important that obviously police have these powers here so that they can do their job. But on the flip side, you also have a very long list of powers as well to make sure that you're protected as an individual and you don't, for example, incriminate yourself. So from here, I'm going to talk about these 4 institutional powers. These are sort of the main powers I would see and recommend talking about as to what the police use. So when we go through the list here, we have 4 main ones. So when we first talk about arrests with or without a warrant, what we can think about is that if you are getting arrested, first of all, you definitely have the right to silence and the presumption of innocence. You need to protect yourself. But in terms of what police can do, if they see you getting involved in a crime, if they see you doing the wrong thing, or if they even have, I guess, a reasonable suspicion that you're doing what you're not supposed to do, they can arrest you straight away without a warrant. So obviously they're not going to wait for things to escalate and get out of hand before arresting you. If they see some violent protests going down or if they see some drug trafficking going on, they're just going to arrest you straight away. But if they do arrest you, it's really important that they caution you, they let you know that you're under arrest, and anything that you say or do can essentially be used against you when you do go to court or if you do go to court. Our second one we talk about is generally at a crime scene, if they're trying to figure out what's going on, they're going to start to question you. They might take a pen and paper out and start to ask what you saw or what you did at a crime scene. But generally, if you haven't done anything wrong, there's nothing wrong with you speaking and telling them what's going on. But I guess when we're looking at questioning, for example, if they're questioning the offender, they're going to let you know if you've been charged with an indictable offense, for example, like armed robbery, and they must record a caution to basically let you know that you've been placed under arrest and they're asking questions and that sort of thing. For summary offenses, it's a little bit different. They will make sure they take down both the both responses for both parties to make sure that in court both parties are protected. But in general, most things are recorded these days. Most police wear a body-worn camera so they can see exactly what's being said in a courtroom. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Once we've gone through the arrest and questioning phase of a person, generally what goes on next is the court proceedings. So if you're getting charged with a really serious indictable offense, chances are you'll be facing what's known as a summons, letting you know that you need to appear in court. Hopefully you know by now that we have summary and indictable offences. With our summary offences, you go to a magistrate's court and the magistrate will be responsible for determining your guilt. These are really, really short trials. They don't take long to do, and most commonly handed down sanction or punishment in the magistrate's court is a fine. If you go to the indictable sort of offence space, first of all, you go to the magistrate's court once again. But the reason you're going there this time is you're going there for a committal hearing. So they're basically giving you a mini trial to see if there's enough evidence against you. Say, for example, you're getting charged with aggravated assault. We're having a committal hearing to see if there's enough evidence to see if it's worth going to trial altogether. If there is enough evidence to go to trial and you plead not guilty, you'd probably proceed straight to the county court for your actual court hearing, and then it will be heard by a judge. Lastly, what we're going to look at before we wrap up this video is that we're going to hand down a sanction for offenders. So if you're actually found guilty of the crime, you'll go to your sentencing hearing and then we'll impose some kind of sanction. So in Victoria, I would say the three most common sanctions that are handed down are things like imprisonment, fines, and community corrections order. So the judge will determine based on various factors what is the appropriate sanction for your offense. All right, so just to round out this video, a couple key points to take away. First of all is that it's really important that you know your definitions of the principles of justice. Like I said, you're going to have to apply those principles of justice generally to a case study, and you want to think about things that, allow for justice to be achieved. So like we talked about equality, things like the use of interpreters. We can talk about access, the ability to access free legal information or a lawyer if we can't afford it. Next one, we have the importance of delegated bodies. So remember that Parliament only sits for 100 days a year. It's really, really important that we have delegated bodies such as Vic Roads to not only take the pressure off Parliament, but to ensure we're making sufficient laws in all required areas. And lastly, we've talked about Victoria Police and your individual rights as well. And I just want to stress that it's really important that we have balance between these two parties. So what that means, once again, is that the police or the institutions need enough power to do their job to investigate and prevent crime. But at the same time, we need to uphold your civil rights by allowing you things like the presumption of innocence, the right to silence, to make sure that you individually are protected. So hopefully this video helps, and I'll see you guys in the next video.